Communication, meaning and purpose. Communication refers to sharing of idea, fact, opinion, information and understanding. Simply stated, communication can be said to be the passing of information and understanding from one person to another. It will be seen that there are at least three elements involved here: the sender at the one end, the receiver at the other, and in between the message or information that is to be passed from one end to the another. The information is passed from the sender to the receiver, and the knowledge of its effects is passed from the receiver to the sender in the form of a feedback. Whether the effect produced is desired one will depend upon how well the receiver understands the meaning of the information. Communication can therefore be aptly said to be the transmission of meaning. Importance of communication. One of the important role of the manager is the information role, wherein a manager seeks information from his peers, subordinates, and other about anything related to their job and responsibilities. He is at the same time a disseminator of information about his job and the organization to those who are concerned with it. As such, a considerable part of this time is devoted to receiving or disseminating information, that is, in communication inside or outside the organization. Some of the studies made in USA show that between 40 to 60% of the work time in a typical manufacturing plant is involved in some phase of communication. Further, the top or and middle level involved in some phase of communication. Further, the top and middle level managers typically devoted 60 to 80% of their total working hours to communicating. According to Peter Drucker, good communication is the foundation for sound management. The managerial function of planning, organizing, directing, and controlling depend on communicating in an enterprise. For planning to be realistic, it is essential that it is based on sound information, which is not possible without a good system of communication existing in an enterprise. The latest development in the market may be communicated to the planners, making their future plans totally meaningless. Adaptation to external environmental on which rests the survival of the business may not be possible without good communication. Again, in order to reach the objective, it is necessary that leadership in exercised, decision made, effort coordinated, people motivated, and operation controlled. Each of these functions involved interaction with the people in the organization and leads to communication. The important fact of organizational life for a manager is communication, and his success will depend upon how effectively he can communicate with other in the organization. In other words, how successfully he can put his ideas across to those who work with him and thereby pursued others to work in the direction of the achievements of goals of the organization. Let us take an relevant example. What is our objective in preparing lesson like this? Simply stated, it is to put across your mind the essence of managerial functions and enable you to understand how these can be discharged effectively. In other words, the we are trying to communicate to you the concept of management and Whether we have been successful in meeting our objective will depend upon the extent to which you are able to understand what we are trying to communicate to you. Communication therefore aims at developing understanding. Now we will know about communication process. So what is communication process? The simplest model of communication process can be sender, message, and receive. The model indicates the essential elements of communication which the sender and one receiver and the message that is exchanged between them. If any one of three elements is missing, communication does not take place. However, the process of communication is much more complex phenomenon consisting of at least five elements which are subjected to various influences. The mode can be put as senders, encoding, channel, decoding, understanding by receiver. Source. In this model, the first element is the source of communication from where the communication originates. The source or sender can be a person, a number, or of person, or even a machine. The sender initiates communication because he has SC needs, thought, idea, or information that he wishes to convey to the other person or machine. For if, for example, an accidental fire has broken out in a part of godown in the factory, the security officer source will need to convey the message immediately to the fire station receiver. Fire alarm machine will do the same or place at the security officer. Encoding message. The next element in the process is that of encoding the information to be transmitted. Encoding enables the thoughts to be put in the form of symbols. Normally, language provides the symbols that are used in the transmission of thoughts to another person. However, language is not the only means to convey the thoughts, needs, or information. There are non-verbal means, example, gesture, which provides another form, trump, which thoughts can be transmitted. The more complex the ideas, needs, or information to be communicated, the more complex becomes the process of encoding them. While an involuntary shriek may adequately convey the degree of alarm felt by the victim, even a carefully worded statement or letter may fail to convey the essential purpose of the communication. This can be happen if the language or symbols used convey different meaning to the sender and the receiver. Encoding of the thoughts produces a message that can be either verbal or non-verbal. Verbal message is in the form of words and language, while non-verbal would be in the form of body gesture like wink, smile, grunt, frown, wave of hand, etc. Channel. The next element in the process of communication is channel through which the communication is transmitted. It is the link that joins the sender and the receiver. The most commonly used channel are sight and sound. In the organizational environment, the channel could take the form of face to face conversation, written memos, telephonic exchange, group meetings, etc. Outside the organization, the channels would be letter or circulars, magazine, radio programs, or TV shows, etc. For communication to be effective, the channel used should be appropriate for the masses as well as the receiver. For an urgent message, telegram, telephone, or radio would be the appropriate channel. Again, the channel chosen would be influenced by the consideration as to whom the message is being directed. Decoding. Decoding and understanding the message constitute the last two elements in the process of communication from sender to receiver. The receiver, in the first instance, receives the message and decodes it. That is to say, interprets and translates it into thoughts, understanding, and desired response. A successful communication occurs when a receiver decodes the message and attaches a meaning to it in which very nearly approximates the idea, thoughts of thoughts or information the sender wishes to transmit. Decoding and understanding are affected by several factors. For example, a receiver cannot decode a message which is in a language known to him. This applies to symbols also. The same symbols may carry a different meaning to the receiver. Again, the receiver's past experience as well as his expectations color the meaning that is attached to the message. All this tends to bring about a divergence between the intended meaning and perceived meaning. In order that this does not happen, it is necessary to develop greater degree of homogeneity between the sender and the receiver, both of whom have their own field of experience. The field of experience constitutes an individual's attitudes, experience, knowledge, environment, and socio-culture background. The greater the overlap of the source and receiver's field of experience, the greater the probability of successful communication. In other words, they have things in common that facilitate better communication. An individual engaged in communication with another person or offers significantly different educational or cultural background will have to put in greater effort to ensure successful communication. A model of communication credited to Wilbur Scarm illustrates this point. The greater the overlap of two persons' field of experience, the higher is the probability of successful communication. The shaded area shows the overlap. Feedback. Response and feedback complete the two-way process of communication. It is through the feedback that the source comes to know if the message was correctly received and understood. In case it is found that the message has been received incorrectly, it is possible to make correction subsequently if response is timely. Senders' effort to communicate are aimed at eliciting the desired response. However, a communication may result in producing any of three outcomes. A desired change may occur, an undesired change may occur, or no change may take place. We consider communication as successful only when it produces the desired response. Noise surrounding the entire spectrum of communication is the noise that affects the accuracy and fidelity of the message communicated. Noise is the factor that disturbs, confuses, or otherwise interferes with communication. It can arise at any stage in the communication process. This sender may not be able to encode the message properly, or he may not be properly audible. The message may get diverted by other sound in the environment. The receiver may not hear the message or comprehend it in a manner not entirely intended by the sender of the message. The channel also may create interference by filtering, that is, allowing some information to pass through and disallowing others. In any case, there is so much of noise or interference in the entire process that there is every possibility of the communication being distorted. We will see later in this unit why distortion takes place and what can be done to minimize the distortion of communication. Verbal and non-verbal communication. A communication in which words are used can be called verbal communication, and the communication over long distance takes place usually through verbal communication. As an adjust to this, in the non-verbal communication, which refers to the use of body language in communicating ideas from the sender to the receiver, non-verbal communication most often takes place unconsciously, and it may either fortify the supplement of the verbal communication or may at times negate the very purpose of verbal communication. Let us examine such of this by one. The main characteristics of verbal communication is the use of words, either written or spoken. Written communication includes personal letters, memoranda, policy and procedures, manuals and notices places on the notice boards. Example of oral communication are conference, committee meeting, telephonic conversation, loudspeaker announcement, etc. Both written and oral communication have their merits and demerits. The written communication has the advantage of being easily verified and of being more precisely defined. In there arises a need of subsequent correction. Spoken messages cannot always be verified so easily. Secondly, because of a written communication is likely to be permanent record, we are more particular to making it precise and accurate. Thirdly, lengthy and complicated messages are better understand if they are put in writing. It would be difficult to understand and retain a lengthy message if it were only in oral form. Together with these advantages, written communications have some drawbacks also. Some of these are: firstly, it is a slower method of communication if we consider the total amount of time involved from the formulation of idea by the sender to the understanding of the idea by the receiver. A written communication competes with all other written material that reaches the desk of an executive. As such, there can be a gap between the time when a communication reaches the manager's desk and the time when he read it. Moreover, if clarification are needed because the message is not clear to the receiver, further delay would take place. Secondly, despite the fact that a greater degree of presence is aimed at while preparing a written communication, there is always a possibility of ambiguity, a lack of clarity creeping in, leading to misunderstanding on the part of the receiver. Clarification naturally means delay. Lastly, Our reliance or written communication can lead to too much of paperwork in the organization. This is only consumes time, money, and energy, but also indicates a lack of trust among the employees of the organization. It has been observed that when trust is low and suspicious are high in an organization, an over reliance or written communication is likely to occur. Oral communication. Although an organization cannot function without written communications of various kinds, yet by far the greater percentage of information is communicated orally. It has been observed that managers spend 60 to 80% of their work time in oral communication. Oral communication has the merit of being more rapid. Generally, the spoken word is the quicker and less complicated way to getting one's ideas across another person. Again, it offers the potential of two-way information flow and therefore less possibility of misunderstanding and the communication. The creation of a less formal atmosphere and generation of fellow feeling are the additional advantage brought about through oral communication. However, the oral communication is not entirely free from defects. It is less effective as a mean of presenting complicated and lengthy data. It is also subject to misinterpretation and the effect of barriers arising from interpersonal relationships. Can you determine which of the two, oral or written, it is the better means of communication? Who will see that the choice between the two is, generally speaking, determined by the situation. However, the use of both together will very often strengthen and reinforce a message. Taking your own case, the material in your hand is the written communication, which will be fortified subsequently through oral communication in the context of classes or educational TV programs. The two together, we hope, will further increase your understanding of the concept of applications of management. Choosing your words. You have read earlier that communication refers to the transmission of meaning from the sender to the receiver. Such transmission takes place through the use of symbols, whether verbal or non-verbal. In verbal communication, the symbol is the word. In order to the transmission of meaning takes place, it is important that the particular symbol used must create within the mind of the receiver the same image which was in the mind of the sender of the communication. It is only then that the basic purpose of communication, which is to influence the behavior of the receiver, will be achieved. It has been found that words do not necessarily have commonly understood meanings. The abstract word like participation or democracy or satisfactory suffers from the difficulty that different people are likely to attach different meanings to these words. The greater the use of such subtract word, the bigger the difficulty in bringing about the understanding of this message and a change in behavior through communication. Keith Davis, in his well known book Human Behavior at Work, Organizational Behavior, has suggested a few guidelines for making verbal communication more effective. These are: use simple words and phrases, use short and familiar words, use personal pronouns such as you, whenever appropriated. Give illustrations and examples. Use short sentence and paragraphs. Use active verbs as such as in manager plans. Economize on adjectives. Express through logically and in the direct way. Avoid unnecessary words. Use of body language in determining the effectiveness of communication in the sense of effective a change in behavior. Non-verbal communication has an important role to play. Experts in the field of human communication have found that in the typical message between two persons, only when 7% of the meaning or content of the message is carried by the actual words being used. Another 38% of the message is carried by one's tone of voice, which includes pacing, timing, pauses, accents. Major part of 55% of the content of the message is in non-verbal form. In other words, in the form of our physical attitude going along with our verbal message. The physical attitude is also referred to as body language. Non-verbal communication can take place with our action or with our body gesture. For example, a manager who pounds his fist on the table while announcing that from now on participative management will be practiced in his organization creates a credibility gap between he says and what he practices. A manager who says that he believes in an open door policy for all his employees but is busy with his own files while an employee is giving him certain suggestions towards improvement in work environment is making non-verbal communication quite in conflict with his verbal communication. In such situation, we the non-verbal message is the stronger one and the verbal message will case to be effective. Body gesture that communicate may relate to your handshake, your smile, your eye contact, your posture while standing or sitting, your facial expression while listening, the shrug of your shoulder, indeed the movement of your any part of your body. You must therefore the watchful of your body language so that it does not contradict your verbal message. This is indeed difficult because the body language is so involuntary that we are not even aware of it. Some of the non-verbal actions which assist communication include maintaining eye contact, occasionally nodding the head in agreement, smiling and showing animation, listening, leaning towards the speaker, speaking at the moderate rate in a quiet tone. Some of non-verbal actions that impede the communication are looking away or turning away from the speaker, sneering, or using other contemptuous gesture, closing your eyes, using an unpleasant tone of voice, speaking too slow or too fast. Channel of communication. An organization structure provides channel for the flow of information on which the decisions of the organizations will be based. As such, an organization can be described as the network of communication channel. These channels can be either intentionally designed or they may be developed as their own accord. When a channel is intentionally prescribed for the flow of communication in the organization, We call it a formal channel, and the communication passing through that channel as formal communication. On the other hand, when communication takes place through channels not essentially designed, in other words, outside the formal channel, such channels are referred to as informal channels and the communication as informal communication. Formal communication. An organization chart shows the direction of formal communication flow in an organization. It identifies the various transmitters and receivers and the channels through which they must communicate. The authority relationship indicates the direction of communication flow in an organization. The formal communication takes place between a superior and subordinate in the form of instruction and direction, such as flow takes place in the downwards direction. Another formal communication takes place between subordinates and superior when reporting on performance is made by the subordinate. Since the subordinate initiate communication to the superior, the flow is upwards. We call this upwards communication. The upward communication can take place from the progress report, budget report, profit and loss statement, requests of grant, etc. Again, formal communication may take place between one division of an organization and another. This could be either literal or diagonal. There is substantial formal communication between production foreman and maintenance foreman, or between production manager and quality control manager. Formal communication may pass across organizational level also. For example, communication between line and staff units takes place very frequently across organizational level. Such communication helps tremendously in the coordination of activity. Finally, formal communication may also arise between the organization and outside parties, example, suppliers, customers, government, etc. This may happen when the management is required to provide information or certain aspects of working of the organization. Communication of this kind is usually one way. Networks in formal communication. You have seen earlier how the formal organizational structure prescribes the channels through which communication flows take place. These channels are designed to keep the flow of information in the orderly manners and to protect the higher level of managers from an overload of unnecessary information. However, the way in which these channels are designed and work can affect the speed and accuracy of information as well as the task performance and satisfaction of members of the group, such as managers have to think of how best to design the organizational structure and the communication network which meets the requirement of the situation. Some research in the design of communication networks has been carried out which indicates their relative merits for use in different situations. Although these networks can assume many forms, these forms can well be looked at as an organizational structure made up of five elements. The circle network represents the three-level hierarchy in the which there is communication between superior and subordinates with cross communication at the operating level. The chain can represent the five-level hierarchy in which communication can take place only upwards and downwards and across organizational lines. The wheel or star represents an administrator and four subordinates which with whom he interacts. There is no interaction among the subordinates. In the Y network, two subordinates report to the superior if may be regarded as a four-level hierarchy. To test the effect of various communication structures, a series of experiments involving simple as well as complex problems were conducted. The studies demonstrated that network centrality was the critical feature and determined whether a particular communication pattern was effective and satisfying to the members for a particular type of task. An index of relative centrality was developed for this purpose in order to determine who occupied the central position in which network. It was found that Y and star networks are highly centralized, with C occupying the central position. The circle and chain networks were found to be centralized, with no member being able to influence all other members. Further, experiments to determine how performance and attitudes were affected by different communication networks showed that centralized network performed faster and more accurately than decentralized network. Provided tasks were comparatively simple, the complex tasks, however, the decentralized networks were comparatively quicker and more accurate. The emergence of a leader and the satisfaction of group members was also affected by the centrality of network. In centralized group, whether the tasks were simple or complex, one person who occupied the central position by virtue of control of information emerged as a leader. In decentralized network, no one position could emerge as the leadership position. As far as the satisfaction of group members is concerned, it was found to be higher in decentralized network in all types of tasks. Satisfaction was higher in the circle, highest in the chain, lower in Y, and the least in the star pattern. The reason for higher satisfaction in decentralized networks was that members of those networks could participate in problem solving. These experiments have certain implication for the design of organizational structure and the communication network. Firstly, an organization with mostly routine, simply task is likely to work more efficiently with a formally centralized network of communication, while more complicated tasks would require decentralized network. Secondly, the most solving objectives of speed and flexibility cannot be achieved by the same pattern of communication. Rather, speed in problem solving can be achieved at the expense of flexibility and vice versa. As such, the communication pattern should be designed with different to the objective that is regarded as most important. Thirdly, the pattern that leads to highest average moral and greatest flexibility in adapting the change condition is the one in which there are a large number of active participants in decision making process. Lastly, access to information is an important source of power in organizations. We were so far explaining to you the communication patterns that are made use of the formal communication in an organization. You are of course aware that along the formal communication exists another organization known as informal organization, which has its own channel for communication. We shall now have a look at the formal informal communication and its channel. Informal communication. Communication that takes place without following the formal lines of communication is said to be informal communication. This channel is not created by management and is usually not under the control of management. An informal system of communication is generally referred to as the grapevine because it spreads throughout the organization with its branches going out in all directions in utter disregard disregard of the level of authority and linking members of the organization in any direction. The informal communication arises as a result of employee needs for informal information which are not met by the formal channel. It has been observed that problems related to work and unfavorable reaction of to various organizational practices are transmitted through informal communication. Since the channel was flexible and established contact at personal level among members of organization at different hierarchical level, the grapevine spreads informal faster than the formal system of communication, as has been pointed out in the unit on planning the and organizing. About 10 to 40% of employees receive information or misinformation about the organization and its members through informal channels of communication. In contrast to the formal communication, which moves on slowly from one person at one hierarchical level to another at the next hierarchical level, the grapevine transmits informal from one person to a group of persons much more rapidly in a cluster chain arrangement. The cluster chain is made up of individuals who act as informal source. Each individual passes the information to several others, some of whom repeats the message to others. Some of these who repeats receive the message may not pass on the information to others, but the information may lead to a change in their thinking on the subject and may sometimes affect their behavior as well. The following diagram illustrates the cluster chain network of informal communication. Though it has been found that informal communication carries accurate information about three-fourths of time, yet there are strong possibilities of its communications being distorted. This happens because of process of filtering whereby each members of the cluster chain acting as a kind of filter passes on only that part of communication which he regards as important. The receiver is left to fill in the gaps and complete the story according to his own imagination. This naturally leads to a very great distortion of the real situation and may at times cause serious problems in the organization. The characteristics of grapevine has been summarized by Keith Davis as follows. A. People talk most when the news is recent. B. People talk about things that affect their work. C. People talk about people they know. D. People working near each other are likely to be on the same grapevine. People who contact each other in the chain of procedure tend to be on the same grapevine. You have seen that the grapevine is a fast and a substantially accurate channel of communication. it has a tremendous capacity to carry information both helpful and harmful to the formal organization. In most cases, it carries information which the formal channels may not or will not carry. The manager's responsibility, therefore, lies in utilizing the positive aspects of the informal channel of communication and in minimizing the negative aspects of this channel. In order to do this, what is the manager can do is to identify the members of the organization who usually seeks the spread information. It is possible that different individuals are active at different times, but usually it will be found that some individuals tend to be more active carriers of information than the others. After identifying such peoples, a manager can use them as sounding boards. If it is distorted that misleading rumors are circulating, it may be desirable policy on the part of the manager to release the official information in order to clarify the situations. At times, management may even find the informal communication channel more useful in transmitting information than the formal channel. A common method of using informal communication is by planned leaks or strategically planned just between you and me remarks, which would obviously reach all parts of the organization much more quickly than any kind of communication through formal channel. Barriers to effective communication. By now, you are familiar with that communication is. You will recollect that in the earlier part of this unit, communication has been defined as the transmission of meaning or understanding. Yet, by far, most of the communication in organization or between person fails to satisfy this criterion. Communication quite often fails to convey the meaning or develop an understanding of the communication sufficient enough to bring about a change in behavior of the recipient. According to Peter Drucker, we have more attempts at communication today. This that is more attempts to talk to others and a surfeit of communication media, yet communication has proved as elusive as a unicorn. The noise level has gone up so fast that no one can really listen anymore to all that bubble about communications. But clearly, there is less and less of communicating. The communication gap between institutions and between groups is in society that has been widening steadily to the point where it threatened to become a unbring, unbridgeable gulf of total misunderstanding. Management tasks, responsibilities, and practices P481. One of the biggest danger in communication is to assure that communication has taken place. Most of us indeed make a great effort in formulating ideas and finding appropriate words and communicating them to other. In organization too, much money and energy is used to develop it system and communication, and yet if you try to assess how far the system has led the effective communication in terms of the desired responsible, you will be surprised at the result. There is a 50-50 chance of the communication not being understood to the degree you would be satisfied with. This has been proved that by a number of experiments and observations made by communications specialists. There is a story from the army which tells of an instruction starting at one end of the line as send reinforcement and ending up at the other end of the line as send 3 shillings and 6 pences. You can perhaps test it yourself. Try to recollect the news items of the previous evening news telecast or broadcast. How many items can you recollect? Most likely less than half. These examples indicate what happens to the most of the communications between persons or within organizations. It is only it is not only important that a communication be sent, it is much more important that it be understood. When an understanding of the communication does not take place, we can hardly expect a desired change in the behavior of the receiver. What causes a failure of communication? The failure in communication arises because of certain blockages or barriers between the sender and the receiver. In order to make a communication effective, it must be ensured that these barriers are removed. What are the commercial media men these days try to achieve is to overcome the barriers and reach the large audience. What kind of barriers interfere with the effectiveness of communication? In the paragraph that follow, we shall discuss the various reasons which either prevent the communication from reaching the receiver or in distort it in such a manner that it ends up either as non-communication or as miscommunication. Since a manager has to use communication as a mean of getting the work done through his subordinates, he must ensure that barriers are minimized and effective communication takes place. The barriers that interfere with the understanding of the communication are of three kinds: semantic, psychological, and organizational. We shall discuss them one by one. Semantic barriers. Most of the difficulties in communication arise because of the same word or symbol means different things to different individuals. Perhaps you remember what happened to Shini Abraham at the recent 1986 Asian Games at Seoul. Despite coming first by the very wide margin in the 800-meter race, she was disqualified and lost her gold medal for having crossed the track at the place where she should not have done. According to her, the mistook the symbol, that is the color of the flag, whereas in our country the red flag indicates danger. In South Korea, white flag is used for the same purpose. Misunderstood Misinterpreting the white flag which had been put up at that point, she crossed the track at the wrong place and suffers a setback. Words which are in reality symbol representing a thing, an action, or a feeling can have several meaning as explaining earlier. Words which represents concentrate things, example car or house, tend to the understood in the same way. while abstract words like merit, effectiveness, or responsibility tend to the interpreted by different person in different ways. Difficulty in misunderstanding may arise when, in the case of ordinary words which have different contextual meanings, lately, such difficulties are being experienced increasingly by people working in international development field. One such problems arose in interpreting the meaning of the word step in a training program of health workers relating to the family health in Jamaica. When a question, what are some of the steps that a mother should take to make sure that her baby keeps healthy, was asked, it was found that there was no response to it. The trainees who were accustomed to only one meaning of the word step based on their experience could not just take any sense of the question. Semantic difficulty may arise because of unfamiliarity with words. For example, a word of some foreign language of which the receiver has no knowledge. A technical word may also create such a problem, it may be beyond the ability of the receiver to understand it. In order to make it effective, a communication must be put into words which are appropriate to the environment and mental framework of the receiver. This ensures the communication to be grasped properly and implemented effectively. A very interesting example of a communication made effective by the use of words appropriate to the environment in which they were used in provided by the following incident at took place in one of the agricultural states of the USA. A proposal for raising the salaries for of the faculty members of an agricultural college was under discussion. The former bloc was totally against giving the raise to the college teachers. They could not see why they should pay those college teachers $5,000 a year for just for talking 12 or 15 hours a week. Faculty representatives made no headway in their negotiations until one of them who had some farming experience got an inspiration. Gentlemen, he hold the member of the administrative body. A college teacher is a little like a bull. It's not the amount of time he spends, it's the importance of what he does. The faculty members got the raise. Semantic barriers may further be created by body language that are inconsistent with the verbal communication. A manager who praised the honesty and sincerity of his subordinate in the sarcastic tone creates doubts in the minds of the subordinates as to the course of action he should adopt in a given situation in future. The same kind of barrier is created by a divergence between the verbal language and the action language of the superior. When action and language are used jointly, the action often have more powerful influence on others' action than do words. A management may, for example, profess its belief in being guided solely by the merit of employees while making promotions. Yet, if employees observes that in actual practice promotions are made on consideration other than merit, the management's professed policy is bounded to be affected by semantic barriers, it is not likely to communicate anything. Only the actions will communicate, and what they communicate will be contrary to what had been said it in so many words. Psychological barriers. Psychological barriers are the prime barriers in interpersonal communication. The meaning that is ascribed to a message depend upon the emotional or psychological status of both the parties concerned. As such, the psychological barriers may be set up either by the receiver or the sender of the message. You have already seen that the effectiveness of any communication depends upon the perception of the right meaning of the message on the part of the receiver. However, the perception of meaning is only much affected by the mental frame of the receiver all the time the message is received. Emotion which dominates our mood at the time, example anger, anxiety, fear, happiness, etc., will affect our interpretation of the message. The phrases viewing with colored glasses or seeing with jaundiced eyes explain vividly how our inner feelings may vitiate our perception of message or the situation. Past experience of the receiver in such situations would also lead to the same effect. The same thing may happen when different individuals interpret the same event or situation. For example, take the case of a supervisor watching a group of employees resting and gossiping on the lawns. How will this situation be perceived? To the supervisor who believes that employees are basically lazy, the situation communication communicates to him that they are playing truant with their work and therefore should be given more work to do and disciplined. To the superior who believes that his workers are self motivated and are sincere workers, the situation communicates that they are enjoying a well earned rest. To the superior's supervisor who is personally insecure, the situations communicate that they are conspiring against him. You will therefore see that a particular kind of situations, event happening or words and symbols are capable of being interpreted by different people in different ways according to their own psychological states. A receiver who is suspicious or hostile, either as a consequence of his feeling of insecurity or because of his past experience with the sender of the communication, is most likely to start reading between the lines and ascribe a distorted meaning to the message. To the receiver's mind, a communication gets tied up with the personality of source. This is what some people call the halo effect. Thus, if we receive a message from a person we admire, we are more likely to agree with it and act accordingly. On the other hand, our immediate reaction will be one or disagreement with a message that has been received from a person we do not like or trust. Thus our perception of meaning of the communication is colored by our own value judgment about the source of the communication. A receiver of the communication suffers from another problem which psychologists refers to as cognitive dissonance, since an individual tend to be fed with too much of information from different sources, which is commonly the case in an organizational setting. He becomes selective in receiving and responding to the communications. He is most likely to hear only those messages that conforms to his own belief, attitudes and judgment. How communication that conflict with his own viewpoint tend to be ignored. Often, the other point of view may not only be ignored, it would indeed be regarded as unfriendly or even hostile. If this happens frequently, subordinates may start questioning whether their superior really wants to hear the bad news that is often contrary to his own. As a consequence, much of the unfavorable news in an organization would never get reported to higher level until the problem has assumed to assumed the form of a crisis. One common phenomenon with all communication is the effect of filtering. This effect is produced when the communication passes through a large number of persons. Each individual through whom the information is passed interprets fact differently, judges from his own point of view that what is important or relevant, and passes it on its with his own interpretation, with the result that the original communication gets altered in the process. The process of filtering involves a biased choice of what is communicated on the part of either the sender or the receiver. Thus, filtering refers to the process of selecting, telling, or selective listening. For example, a subordinate may tell the boss what the boss wants to hear. Similarly, through several factors affecting productivity in the organization may have been identified by the staff, yet the manager may hear and respond only to those factors that fit his convenienced preconceived view of the situation. In either case, selectively is introduced in the process of communication, leading to a distortion in communication. Organizations are particularly prone to the effect of filtering. In large organizations where there are several levels of through which a communication must pass, filtering takes place at each level. In order to save the time of the busy executive and to save him from information overload, it is common in organizations for subordinates to prepare note or abstract of the communication before passing it on the supervisor. The higher information has to travel, the higher is the degree of abstraction, with the possibility that significant piece of information may be entirely missed on their significance, diluted or distorted. The largely the number of filtering points in an organization, the greater is the chances of distortion. This may happen when outside an organization, when communication is passed on verbally from one to another, as in a grapevine. Organizational barriers. Organizations provide a formal framework through which communication is designed to flow. The structuring of the flow itself tend to act as a barrier against free flow of communication between persons and level in the organizations. Rules may prescribe how communication are to move from one level to another in upwards or downwards directions. Not only is there a possibility of delays in the communication reaching its destination, but also there is every possibility of communication getting distorted through the process of filtering described in the previous paragraph. It has been found that when channeled information is channeled through different level of organization, it becomes altered as people interpreted fact differently. It In an organizational setting, this can be a very big problem since senior level executives who work through other have to depend more and more on the information and interpretation of their subordinates. Critical information that has lost its criticality because of the action of the intervening level may jeopardize the position of the manager as well as the organization itself. It has been observed that the upward communication is particularly subject to the influence of filtering in large organizations. Upward communication serves essentially two purposes in an organization. First, it helps in coordinating and controlling the activities of the organization. Second, it enables the superior to appraise the performance of his subordinates. While the former does not create any problems, the latter has incomplication, implement, behavioral implications. It is human nature to show one's performance in a better light than what is actually is. This tendency of an individual naturally brings about a filtering through conscious or unconscious altering, withholding or interpreting facts to be transmitted upwards. Dependency syndrome of the subordinate heightens the tendency to filter information in a superior subordinate relationship. The subordinate is generally speaking dependent on the superior for his advancement. Studies show that the greater the dependency of the subordinate on his superior for the satisfaction of his needs, the more his dependent tendency to filter information of an unfavorable kind. It has been found that subordinates are generally unwilling to communicate unfavorable information when they feel that their superior has the power to punish them in some way. Only positive aspects of performance are likely to be communicated upwards. Another barriers in another barriers in organizational setting is created by the superior subordinate relationship between which develop a distance between the two. People are more comfortable in communicating with persons of similar status on their own. Communication with persons of higher or lower status is likely to be formal and reticent rather than informal and free. The distance between the superior and subordinates and the difficulty in freer communication between them tends to be highlighted through status symbol which might be used to show the hierarchical status of the person concerned. Status symbols within an organization may be in the form of separate parking space, separate bathrooms, separate refreshment rooms, cabinet with stylish furniture, carpets, etc. Such symbols accentuate, accentuate the distance between the different hierarchical level and tend to widen the communication gap. Perhaps you may have read the among the several characteristics of Japanese style of management is the removal of status symbol. For example, under the Japanese system, there are no separate cabins for managers, uniforms for workers and managers are the same. They eat the same menu in the same cafeteria. All these are intended to reduce the distance between the workers and the managers and bring about a better understanding of the problems of the organization, which is the chief objective of organizational communication. You have read in the last few pages about the problems and crop up in communicating with others. Whether inside or outside the organization, these problems create an interference in the process of sharing of the meaning of a communication and thus block its effectiveness. As a manager, you will be continuously required to make use of your communication abilities in the performance of your job. Since your success as a manager will be judged in terms of the result that you produce, the effectiveness of your communication is therefore of prime importance to you. We shall explain to you in a few perhaps below what you can do to make your communications effective. Making communication effective. In order to make your interpersonal communication more effective, the following are some of the points that you should bear in mind. Use direct, simple, and avoid words which can have ambiguous meaning. Keep the receiver audience in mind while choosing the words and phrases. Your communication will be effective in the words you use are appropriate for the level of receivers or for whom the communication is aimed at. If you look through history, you will find the great masses have been simple and short. Moses and only 10 commandments, and they hardly add up to 60 words, and the 17 rock edicts of Ashoka was equally brief and to the point. Use face to face communication. Face to face communication allows more accurate feedback to be achieved through two-way communication. Generally speaking, people express express themselves more freely while taking talking rather than through writing. Face to face communication permits a manager to see and understand the non-verbal sign also. Use feedbacks. Feedback enables the sender to judge whether his ideas has been received in the manners as they were originally intended. Most often, it is assumed that communication has taken place because a notice has been put on the notice board. or an order issued. You must devise way to separate fact from distortion. Listen with understanding. The biggest block to interpersonal communication is said to be the inability to listen intelligently, understandingly, and skillfully to another person. We tend to confuse listening while with hearing, which is a physical process. Listening actually is more than hearing. It involves understanding. Real communication takes place when the listener truly hears and understands the position and intent of the speaker. Most managers are, however, poor listeners. Apart from other reasons, the poor listening performance, the main reason is the disparity in the speed of speaking and of listening. While an average person can speak at the rate of 150 words per minute, you can think listen and think at the rate of our 1000 words per minute. The difference obviously leaves idle time for the mind to wander about and lose some part of the message that is sought to be conveyed. In order to be successful manager, you must attempt to develop your listening ability by utilizing your idle time in projecting yourself into the mind of the other party and understanding the factual and emotional content of the message without making an attempt at criticizing, approving, or disapproving it until after you have fully heard and understood the remarks. The empathetic listening, as it is called, vastly improved the understanding of both the parties, bringing in its wake improved interpersonal relationships in the organization. Create constructive environment for the expression of ideas. If you can create a climate in which people can be confident that what they say will be listened to with sympathy and considered constructively, you can be sure of a successful and creative communication. This is, however, possibly only in an environment of trust within has to be generated by management through its policies and action. Be careful while your non-verbal communication, because you hold a status higher than your subordinates. Your gestures are observed and felt by your sub- subordinates. Your body language, therefore, must be supportive of your communication through words. One of the powerful means of communication are your action, which speaks louder than the words. If you expect your communication to be effective, ensure that your actions are consistent with your words. Develop and use organizational structure which minimize the channel changes of filtering the communication. Decentralization of authority and broadening of span of control can be attempted to reduce the level in the organization and minimize the authority filters. The American Management Association has developed a set of 10 suggestions for improving communication, refers to as that the 10 commandments of good communication. Briefly, these suggestions are: first, clarify before attempting to communicate. Second, examine the purpose of communication. Third, Understand the physical and human environment when communicating. Fourth, in planning communication, consult others to obtain their support as well as the facts. Fifth, consider the content and the overtones of the message. Sixth, whenever possible, communicate sometimes that helps or is valued by the receiver. Seventh, communications to be effective requires following up. Eighth, communicate messages that are of short run and long run importance. Ninth, actions must be congruent with communication. Tenth, be a good listener. Summary of managerial communication. Communication is the transfer of information from one person to another. Successful communication is much more than mere transfer of information. It is the transfer of meaning and understanding between two persons. Communication has paved the way for modern civilization, and good of communication is the foundation for sound management. No managerial activity is possible without communication of some kind, and the major part of a manager's working time is devoted to communicating. Communication is accomplished through a process in which the sender encodes an idea which is transmitted through a channel to a receiver who decodes the message and gains an understanding of the idea of the sender. The reserve process of feedback also follows the same pattern during the entire process. Interference is created by noise, which can lead to distortion of the communication. Communication takes place either orally or in writing. It could be just one way or two way, which allows the sender and receiver to interact with each other. A two-way communication is regarded better as it brings about understanding through clarity of the message. In an organization, communication may take place in several directions: upwards, downwards, lateral, and diagonal. Words, either written or oral, convey a very small part of the communications. Most of it is transmitted through non-verbal gesture. A manager thought a manager ought to be careful lest his non-verbal gesture contradict his verbal message. Communication between an organization flows either through formally designed authority channels or through informal channels spontaneously formed and cutting across authority levels. Informal channels can have both positive and negative sides. Cluster chain networks of informal communication permits a rapid flow of communication through the formation of a grapevine. Formal communication is transmitted through several kinds of networks. The choice of a network will depend upon consideration of the complexity of a task, speed in decision making in order to adapt to change, and the satisfaction of members desired. Interference in communication is caused by semantic, psychological, and organizational barrier. In order to achieve effectiveness in communication, manager should consciously try to lower these barriers.